Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Crypto Hipster Podcast. This is your host, Jamil Hassan, the Crypto Hipster, where I interview founders, entrepreneurs, executives, thought leaders, amazing guests all around the world of crypto and blockchain. And today I have, you guessed it, another amazing guest. I'm actually looking forward to this because I believe he has a podcast too. So let me introduce him. He's the co-founder, CEO of Fluence Labs, Tom Trowbridge. Tom, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on. Thrilled to be here.
You're very welcome. Thanks for joining me today. So let's kick things off, and I'll ask you first. What is your background, and is it a logical background for what you're doing now?
Well, it depends how far back you want to go. And so I guess the answer is that my most recent background before joining Fluence as a co-founder was helping found Hedera Hashgraph. And so I joined Mance and Lehman in 2017 when it was just a Swirl's white paper. And we basically propelled that into Hedera, the launched public ledger. So founding and launching that public ledger is about as good a background you could have for being a crypto founder I could think of. So that, was baptism by fire, everything from hiring and recruiting to raising money to getting council members on to getting people to use the network, absolutely everything. So that was terrific. And going further back, listen, I've always been interested and involved in technology one way or another, usually on the financing or investing side. But my career goes back pretty far. So I never was a actual developer, but knew enough about telecom in particular and different parts of tech to be dangerous.
So you're in telecom early. You were at Hedera Hashgraph. How'd you make the transition from trad to, crypto?
Well, so to start it off, I mean, go back to the beginning, I suppose, to make it easier. Started off doing investment banking at Bear Stearns a long time ago in the telecom and technology team. Then did investing on in the telecoms side for a number of years, and then moved into more traditional asset management like Goldman Sachs and a variety of other companies. But had interest in Bitcoin probably dating from around 2014, 15 and basically was evaluating a bunch of projects just on a personal side. And a friend introduced me to Hedera, got to know the team, and I left my traditional TradFi job and joined Manson Lehman as at the time as president of Swirls. Swirls was the only entity that existed, and then we spun off Hedera, which I helped kind of architect and launch from the beginning. So I basically saw Hedera as a very viable alternative to Ethereum. And the unique thing about Hedera was that the founders were two academics with military experiences. They were definitely not crypto native, neither was I at the time, but they also weren't institutionally kind of deep in terms of relationships. And I had a lot of institutional relationships. So it was actually probably one of the perfect projects for someone who was not crypto native to join and basically help on a whole bunch of fronts where I could add value very specifically to that project. But that experience then became relevant across the whole industry. But because of their very specific expertise, I could be very complimentary to that team from the very beginning, and that was a very additive relationship.
Makes sense to me. Sounds good. I remember when I was in TradFi, I was at AIG, and not once, I left in 2017, not once when I was there, especially the last 5 years, did I hear the word Bitcoin mentioned. You know, so, but I regress. What's Fluence? Ask you what Fluence Labs is all about and what makes you guys a unique player in the cloud computing space.
So Fluence, and there's a couple of different distinctions here. Fluence is the name of the network, which is now governed by the Fluence DAO, which is a Swiss association. The company that I work for is called Cloudless Labs, formerly Fluence Labs. So, like many enterprise, like many groups in the space, we've separated the development entity from the governance entity and from the actual protocol. But the project is Fluence, and Fluence is building the cloudless internet. basically a decentralized compute platform. And so we want to free people from being constrained and subject to the basic top three cloud oligopolists, Google, Amazon, and Microsoft. And so what Fluence does is it has built a open architecture for doing compute. And if you take even a further step back in crypto, we've successfully decentralized payments with Bitcoin, with Ethereum, you name it, right? And we've also pretty successfully decentralized storage with Arweave, with Filecoin, with a couple of others. But you need to have compute decentralized, or else you are still subject to every single bottleneck and risk of a centralized system. And so a whole lot of Web3 still runs in the traditional centralized cloud. And it's not because these projects want to do it, it's because there haven't been really viable alternatives until now. And so we are helping decentralize first Web3, I hope, but then far more than that, and decentralize the overall kind of Web 2 ecosystem. And if you think about the evolution of computing, it started off with mainframes that companies hosted on-prem. And they built teams, and then they were dragged into the cloud. And the cloud now is, the area, by the way, hosting and managing compute infrastructure is the core expertise of about 0 companies, right? That's the core expertise of Amazon, of a couple big web companies. It's not your average company's expertise, and it's a waste of resources, management time, and effort to manage that. So quite logically, they outsource that to Amazon, Google, Microsoft, as any company reasonably would do. However, those companies are now control 70%, I think, of the cloud, and by extension, most of the internet. And that's a dangerous place to be. It's bad because it both leads to closed ecosystems. Innovation is not great. That means pricing is high. It's very hard to leave. There's a whole number of elements that make that not ideal. There's an outage. There's homogeneous hardware. So you see Cloudflare, Microsoft outages happen in July. You see, millions of consumers affected as airline reservation systems go down, et cetera, right? That's because of so many these guys, Microsoft and Cloudflare are in so many companies' infrastructure, so they go down. It's just this effect across the whole world, and so there's also cost. And when you think about instead deploying your infrastructure, your compute infrastructure on Fluence, you're doing it at a far cheaper rate because there's a lot of excess CPUs that are not being used, and because it's open infrastructure, customers can change their provider whenever they want without any kind of lock-in or cost or fee, which leads to a lack of pricing power on the provider side, which leads pricing to be low, right? Anyone raises prices or someone else lowers prices, the compute moves. And so that, I think that our objective here is to be compelling, not for just philosophical reasons, but to have a business case that saves enough money for users that is compelling for traditional Web 2 to move to this open infrastructure. And that we think we're about 70-80% cheaper than the cloud for similar type of operations. And so we are going to literally see how real that pricing is in the next sort of month or so, kind of end of September. And so that I think is what makes us, you also, if you're on Fluence, you're obviously not subject to single points of failure. You've got heterogeneous hardware, you've got different geographies and locations, right? You're not subject to single points of censorship. There's a whole list of benefits, but price is obviously a compelling one to start off with.
And I understand the competition. I understand the price. I understand the benefits. What I don't understand is how a cloudless internet would work, right? So what of a cloudless?
I guess I got to be very clear with the terminology here because it's not obvious. And so what cloudless means is not using the closed proprietary cloud ecosystems. So when you think of the cloud, you're thinking, I'm presuming here, just the general network of computers around the world. When I say cloud and I say cloudless, I'm thinking of Amazon, Google, Microsoft, distinct, closed, particular ecosystems. So cloudless means you still have this whole global network, but you're not relying on one of those three oligopolists proprietary software tooling.
That makes a lot of sense. So I remember using the BRD, no longer an app, but it was a BRD app or back in 2017, 18. And then I did a download of my history, and it was provided by Amazon Web Services. And I was like, I thought that it shouldn't wasn't supposed to be on Amazon. I thought it was like what you're saying, cloudless, not one of those three oligopolies. So, and I was wondering why it was that. So I guess we need to move on from there. So it makes sense what you're doing. So also when I hear cloud computing, I think of DeepIn. I think, how would you describe the momentum currently of DeepIn in the crypto overall market?
So I described the what of DeepIn?
The momentum, I guess,
Mm.
momentum or the
Yeah. Listen, you referenced this earlier, but I think that a lot of founders are head down, focused on their particular projects, and that's certainly what I was at Hedera. I am very bullish on the entire DePIN sector, decentralized physical infrastructure networks, and so started a DePIN podcast called DePINed, DEPINID.xyz, to interview founders and kind of investors and key ecosystem participants in the DePIN ecosystem. And I did that because I think this ecosystem is primed to be the next kind of crypto onboarding or next industry that will really drive crypto adoption. And I think it has some level of attention now, but just minuscule compared to where I think it can be. And so if you look at the top projects, whether it's Helium or Filecoin or Render, they look like they've got decent market caps and decent attention, but each one of these is attacking literally trillion-dollar industries that they have the potential to disrupt. And so I think overall, this sector is going to be enormous. And I think that's one reason that it will drive the next wave of crypto adoption. But the other is that it's far more understandable to the average person than a DeFi protocol or than some of the more early stage kind of maybe L1s, L2 type networks. And so if people can understand that they put a device in their car and they start to earn because it's mapping, like Hive Mapper or Demo, they're selling their data and getting new applications on their car. That what Demo does, or Spexy, you can launch a drone and you'd be paid for mapping things, or you can buy a weather station, sell weather data like WeatherXM, or you can do number of these different type of very tangible activities that can earn money for you. I think that is much, and the crypto enables and allows that. I think that is far easier to comprehend. And I'd further say that the real kind of catalyst for this to happen, because by the way, there's millions of people doing those things right now, but the catalyst is that real revenue comes into one or two or a number of these DePIN networks. And I think there's several that have been working on large institutional clients for quite a while. And the one or two or a number of those contracts are going to drop at some point. And then all of a sudden, you're going to see real revenue from real companies going into one or several of these DePIN projects. And I think that is going to really start to spark an examination of this entire space and what the possibilities are. So, I think, and I think that some people think of DePIN, they think of compute, and that's great. And there's us on the CPUs, and there's Aether on the GPUs, and IO.net, and Akash, and there's a number of people, and there's a couple of the storage. But the deepen offerings go so much beyond kind of cloud alternatives into um, projects that involve everyday people in so many ways, in ways I also think traditional centralized companies are going to have a very difficult time competing with.
And those projects mentioned, including something like RLC or some others like that, you said mentioned they have contracts, right? I see every one of them also being involved in the AI sphere and partnering or having announcements with with NVIDIA, right? So
NVIDIA, yeah.
what's the future of AI depend?
Well, I guess what I'd say there is that I think you're referencing Aether that has an NVIDIA kind of as part of it. It has an NVIDIA. It's the only Web3 company, I believe, that has it's part of the NVIDIA kind of startup ecosystem or some element of that. So they have a very special relationship with NVIDIA that no other decentralized infrastructure company has, and that's great for them that they were able to accomplish that. It was a lot of hard work, I know, um, but I think that as AI grows, demand for AI grows, then demand for computing continues to grow, and I think that deepen networks serve a very important role in monetizing unused GPU capacity. And so what you can obviously say is, well, hold on, if there's a shortage, then how is there unused capacity? And the answer is that companies are have to pre-order machines based on future demand. There's a real lag in terms of delivery and then use. So what is normal is the company will forecast out their demand for the next couple of years, order those machines, and when the machines get delivered, they're still not at the planned capacity use because that they're going to grow into that. So a lot of businesses, data centers, whoever it is, will receive more machines than they need that day because they planned for growth in the future. Because if they don't, they're gonna have to turn around the next day and do another order for, and then won't get that for another year, et cetera. Right. So you have to plan in advance. So you end up with excess capacity that you can monetize immediately using some of these decentralized DePIN or these DePIN GPU networks. So if you order twice as much as you need, rather than just have that sit in your company or sit in a data center, you can then monetize those by putting them out on a decentralized platform and other people rent them, use them, et cetera. Then when you need them, you just take them over, those contracts end, you take them over and you use them. And so that to me is going to be a regular and consistent use and need that deepen projects can fulfill on the on sort of the AI on the AI GPU front.
Interesting. You know, I've been watching corporate America for the past decade and a half, right? And how the model has changed from capital budgeting to reduce costs, you know, and do buybacks, but that's another part of it. But, this sounds to me like if companies adopted these deep end, infrastructure, that they will be able to reduce costs and improve their company performance. What are your thoughts?
Well, yes, but there's a couple, you got to be a little bit more specific as to which where we're talking about here because um, for sure, if we give you back, switch back to the example of Fluence, if we're able to offer compute at a say, just pick a number, 70% discount, if a company's spending $1 million on the cloud and they could save 700 grand, that is nice to any company. There's no manager that's not happy to save that amount of money, right? There's somebody in that organization that gets a win for saving that. So I think you do see that for sure with the type of CPU stuff that Fluence has, without a doubt. And that's very corporate savings oriented. I think once we get a bit more advanced than where we are right now, on the AI side, there it's a little trickier because I think most companies are not going to be building. Let me back up. Many companies will train their own AI models, but they're not going to be building this infrastructure in-house. So to your point, they will use DeepIn infrastructure to train their models, because I'm not sure how much access they would have to the top kind of GPUs. The other piece, though, is that I think most companies will probably just use the leading off the shelf models, AI models, maybe tweak them somehow, right? And so I don't think every company is going to be investing heavily in their own AI. They might be, but I think there's sort of phases. There's the companies that are focused and specialized, like like OpenAI, on making the top best models ever, and Microsoft, et cetera. Then there's ones that have a lot of their own data. They want to train it, and they're going to outsource. They're going to have models. They outsource the training to other DeepIn projects because they don't want to have the infrastructure in house. And then there's like a pyramid, right? And then it goes down to the other layer of the pyramid, where you're going to have companies that are just happy to either use off the shelf AI models, or maybe buy some extra services or some customization based on their workflows that are relevant. And I tough time. I know the top of that pyramid, that's a handful of companies, but the distinction between the second and third tier is going to be hard, and is going to depend a lot on the expertise and the data kind of importance of the composition of each of those tiers.
Got it. So you mentioned a couple of things. One was the Amazon outage in July. I was driving from Connecticut to Philadelphia because my son had a race, a rowing regatta. And we had to go past New York, which is the airport's here, JFK, LaGuardia. You had to go past Newark, and the whole thing was a mess, right? So I'm thinking, if you improve, like, based on what you said, and and then you said based on you have off the shelf solutions that Microsoft offers. How can you really disrupt, and how can DeepIn really disrupt the massive markets? And then and as a result, what kind of improvements can we see and expect in the future?
Big question. I think there is DeepIn by itself will not address whether or not there is a Microsoft or Cloudflare outage. And no matter what, and if you are using, if DeepIn, fast forward to a world where DeepIn is widely used and infrastructure is running on DeepIn networks, you still could be subject to a Cloudflare outage or a Microsoft outage, still potentially could. The distinction is that you won't, that just by the heterogeneous nature of DeepIn hardware and software, any outage will not be as severe as they would be in a centralized cloud. And so you're protected in two ways. One, if a piece of software or a piece of hardware fails, just by the nature of DeepIn, you're running different hardware in different locations, and probably even different software. And so you're not as subject to one outage collapsing an industry. That's sort of point number one. And point number two is that you should be able to shift your data and move from one provider to another. And so if a provider goes down, you can quite quickly move to a different provider. And so that is another, that's obviously relevant on where your data is stored, how you access the data, but your compute, all this stuff, if it's out there, you should be able to move it pretty quickly to another provider and be up and running, as opposed to being Microsoft's down, so you're down because you can't access anything. And that is obviously a dangerous situation. But I also want to be clear about a couple of things here. The cloud, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, have spent billions of dollars over 2 decades building and refining the services that companies use. This is not an easy thing to disrupt. It's not an easy thing to replace. It takes a lot of work, a lot of tooling, a lot of customization, a lot of just engineering hours to offer a viable alternative to any one of the verticals that those companies address. And so what I think you will see is tooling develop maybe industry by industry or use case by use case that then becomes compelling for one sort of sliver. And then that sliver serves as an example and people build tooling for another sliver and that sliver advances. But you will not see a kind of wholesale movement away from the cloud to decentralized systems just because the software kind of capabilities aren't there and will take a while to build.
I agree. I agree. You can't, I guess, can't compete on the product or service level, but I think in order to get there, in order to start the movement, people have to understand that there are inherent dangers of huge centralized company power, right?
Oh,
Right. They have to understand that, right? How do we get them to understand that? And then how do we have them understand how we can reduce the dangers?
yeah, I mean, and that company power goes well beyond the inconvenience of the airlines going down, right? That goes way beyond that. It goes into these incredibly large companies becoming quasi-governmental agencies and kind of and operating with such symbiosis to governments that the line gets a little bit blurred. And that is and then there are cases. There's a case I saw recently of a person that Amazon went after for allegedly violating a non-compete, which he didn't, and they were able to compel law enforcement to freeze bank accounts and disrupt his whole life and his family and everything prior to any conviction, prior to any kind of even investigation as to what went wrong. And he was ultimately exonerated at multi-years, multi-difficult family wrecking kind of episode that is just unfortunate, just so devastating to hear about. But that's what can happen. So that's just a very another sort of element of company power. So anyway, I guess the point is that they're not really benign, and so that is something that just needs to be recognized. The other point, though, I think to mention is very hard to compete head on with these large companies, and I think that any one company trying to do that would be challenged. The benefit that the Fluence has and the Web3 world has together is that when you're building an open ecosystem, anyone in the world can contribute to that. And so rather than raising money and hiring a team to go compete, instead, you're just providing incentives for the whole world to help build software that is most relevant. And so while I don't think any one company or any one team could challenge any of these largest companies in the world, a global network of developers, I think, is pretty much unstoppable. And so an example of that obviously is Linux, which started a decade after Microsoft and had none of the billions of dollars that Microsoft had in Windows. And yet Linux is now the leading operating system, and got that way by, the I guess core, the sort of genius core original architecture, the incredible dedication, motivation of its founder, but also crucially, the dedication of thousands and thousands of developers around the world that built code, tested it, ran it, etc. And that is, I think, what we're trying to build and enable is that type of similar incentive structure, even actually more explicit incentive structure, but that similar type of community involvement. That is the only way that we build tools that can compete with at all the large clouds.
So a global decentralized community network where everybody's actively participating and working together toward a common solution is the way to strip away centralized power.
It's the way to compete with it effectively. And phrased differently, I don't think there's another way.
Yeah, I agree. That sounds good. I look forward to that world. So, oh,
We're working on enabling it. That's for sure.
awesome. So, I want to thank you very much for your time today for speaking with me. I enjoyed speaking with you. I have one last question, and that's how can people find out more information about you, about Fluence, about what you guys do? How can they start to use your products and services when it's how can they do that?
Well, I guess the let's start with fluence.network is our website. Fluence_project is us at Twitter. And you can find the podcast, which is DEPINED, dpin.xyz. Those are the obvious ways to find it. I am on Twitter, the Tom Tro, and on Telegram, our it's Fluence_project is our Telegram handle as well. So you can find us there and join that community. So those are the best ways, and hope to connect with people on those platforms.
Awesome. Thank you very much for your time today.
Great, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.